Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share the platform. This talk is going to be of a completely different nature than the talks that we had earlier. So here I'm going to primarily organize my talk along these lines. So how does the theme of birth, death and rebirth, different perspectives, align with this conference? Then this question of what birth, rebirth, etc., is it meaningful, etc., is all started from almost 3,000 years ago. I'll give you some earlier references. Then what is clinician's perspective and what is philosopher's perspective? Is there something which is likely to be beneficial is the later part of my talk, and I'll make a few concluding remarks. How does it fit into this Congress? So it is perhaps related to what we call a socio-cultural anthropology, which basically studies about beliefs, morals, arts, and so on associated with various groups. And here I want to focus on whether a particular viewpoint which has been held by a certain culture has any kind of association with upholding ethics. So is the kind of point that I want to make. And in fact, yesterday, we were discussing during the car. I was so happy that Dr. Ravindranath came all over to the airport, and then we were discussing on various issues. And there are certain people who I have seen in my own life who can survive with a handful of nuts. So it is unbelievable to us, but there was another person whom I have seen just survive for a week, who stayed with me, who took a certain decision that the project was not over and he has to leave and complete the project in a week. So he was staying with me almost 25 years ago. This is something which is personally I saw. And he said that unless the project is getting over, I'm not going to consume anything other than water. So this person worked for almost a week, and on the final day, he was supposed to take a flight at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then he sits at 2 o'clock in the morning and then writes almost 25 pages as a preface to that, completes by 4:30 and then leaves for the airport. These are certain things which really strike us, and then we feel astonished that such things do happen. I don't know how. We don't have a certain explanation. So it has to do perhaps with certain beliefs, certain faith, which works. And this slide won't bother. So just to see, this Nachiketa is a name that some of you may be familiar with. It occurs in a Upanishad called Kathopanishad, one of the important texts. There the story goes like that. This boy goes and approaches the god of death and then asks this question. So there are people who believe that there is something which is beyond this physical body after the death. There are certain other groups which believe that there is nothing like that. So which is the one? I would like to know the truth from you as god of death. This is how the story goes. The point is, so if you believe that there is nothing which is beyond this physical body, then the moment you die, so there is nothing which is connected with further birth. And there are a few other people who believe that there is something called consciousness which is beyond this physical mind-body sense complex. So which one is something correct and which one is worth taking? So that is the point that I am trying to say. Forget about this correctness. So is there some advantage in having one over the other? This is another thing that we can see. Today, the clinician's perspective of birth, one can describe this as the physical separation of a certain lump of a mass from another lump of a mass. So this is one thing which we can do. And how does it happen? So there are various ways it happens. And how does this association happen of one kind of thing with another kind of a thing? So there are various processes that many of you would know, and I don't think there is any point in elaborating that. Now, there is another interesting perspective that has been presented here in some of these earlier texts called Upanishads. So where they have spoken of when does the body get associated with another body. assume that there is something which is beyond this. So one has to associate. So one can say that some cell associates with some other cell and something springs up. This is what our understanding today is. Okay? Some cell goes and connects with some other cell and there is something which is created. So when exactly the birth happens, so there are different perspectives which are being presented here, and in the Upanishadic literature they talk of three kinds of births. One is associated with the male, the next is connection with the female, and the third birth they call, that is something which is coming out. Okay? So that is in short. And they also talk about this extremely important fact, which there are thousands of books which are being authored today, how to take care of the prenatal state. Okay? So this prenatal state, there is a very interesting discussion. These Upanishads are basically supposed to be highly philosophical, but they also give importance to this particular aspect of taking care of this prenatal condition and that how it impacts the health of a baby. So this is regarding birth. So I come to the phenomenon of death. So when is this happening? So there is a general understanding that there is a state in which the breath stops, the brain stops functioning, and this fellow stops breathing, and he becomes motionless, the doctor declares, and then he is taken somewhere. There are various theories which are being presented today. When exactly is this moment when a person can be called dead? Okay? So there are different views which are being presented: cardiovascular respiratory viewpoint, whole brain viewpoint, information theoretic viewpoint. Is there something which is beyond this? Is what I am just going to say. Or do certain cultures have a certain faith that there is something which is beyond this to the death? What exactly is the notion of birth, death, etc. do they hold? And interestingly, these clinicians today have pondered over. See, this phenomenon is quite intriguing, and I was quite fascinated when I came across this video. Here at the end, you see this Sam Parnia is a very famous doctor in New York University, and this short video was very, very revealing to me. So here he presents certain case, and the dead realizes that he is dead. How does it happen? Okay. So there are certain resuscitation processes where they have, see, today we are blessed with science and technology which can take us to a certain level of understanding which was never ever possible earlier. And because of that, these kind of studies have not only made these people wonder, but also ponder over certain questions which have some link to the kind of questions that have been posed in those days by philosophers. Okay, now this is regarding this clinician's view. Now I come to the philosopher's view. So forgive me. So if you don't follow this script, it doesn't matter. So how do the philosophers view the concept of birth? So they have something called a consciousness, and this consciousness gets associated with a certain physical body, is what you call as birth. And the consciousness dissociating with this physical body is what you call as death. And once again getting associated with another form of a body is what they call as rebirth. And this incarnation is something which is very interesting. So according to this philosopher's theory, or this school of philosophy, this reincarnation is again obviously associated with the consciousness getting connected with the physical body, but here there is a distinction between that and this. So if it happens at one's own will, then you call it as a reincarnation. If it happens not by your choice, then you call it as rebirth. Okay? So this is the difference that is being kept by them. And why does it get associated? When does it get associated? So you can call it as Atman, you can call it as consciousness, etc. But then, is there a way by which you can sort of sever this association? So this is the kind of question that is also being posed. And they say that it can be severed provided there is a certain notion of karma which comes to a certain end. What is this karma? I will explain in the next slide. The notion of karma as presented in this text essentially refers to the law of cause and effect. It encompasses the notion that every action, thought, speech, etc. that you hold has a consequence in future, present and future experiences. The individual accumulates a storehouse of karmic imprints, if you can call it, through their own action of, there is a certain understanding that it is not merely associated or getting dissociated the moment the body dies. So you say that there is something which gets accumulated somewhere else, which is non-tangible to you, and this is something which will keep continuing, and it plays a crucial role in the physical attributes of the birth, the family in which you are born, the environment, life circumstances, and so on and so forth. Now, if you assume that each and every act that you have, either speech or intention, so it has a certain effect, and it has a certain location where it can get stored, then obviously you may have to say there is also the statement that positive actions like compassion, selflessness, righteousness, leads to what is called positive karma, and therefore it leads to favorable conditions, experiences in future births. And this harmful intention that you have, leads to negative karma, and it will put you into challenging circumstances. So this is another slot which basically says, slide. There is an interesting thing. So we have a situation where we still have this issue. So there are same parents, they give rise to, this genesis, this cannot explain, DNA cannot explain, completely different behaviors. So astrology cannot explain, and so on and so forth in the case of twins. Then how do you explain? So there comes this notion that there is a possibility of something which we may call as imprints carried earlier. I have seen people at the age of 4, they may know 450 ragas. How did he come to know? We have no way to explain this. And this is an interesting verse. I think I'll just leave this. I will not quote the original, but I'll just summarize to you. So it basically says that there is a certain viewpoint which you can hold, by which the enlightened person is someone who is able to see that this is a physical body to which I am associated, just like I am associated with the guest house here, warrior room. So I just leave this. So similarly, this consciousness gets associated with this body for a certain period of time, and then it leaves. Let us assume that this is the notion that we can bring in. What happens is, if you remain unattached, the point I am trying to make is, I am not going to bother about what is happening in the room. So if there is a crack in the room, I don't care. Right? So that doesn't really pain me because I am not trying to associate with that as mine. So similarly, if you can bring in that notion to your own body itself. So this is what essentially it says. So this is just like a guest house where this conscious being comes, resides, and then goes off. Now there is a lot of superiority and inferiority complex all arise, whether it is with respect to physical feature or the kind of accomplishment that you have achieved. So all get tagged to you, provided you are so stuck to it. And if you are able to see that this is something which is going to be temporarily connected with me, with this body, so then there is a lot of advantage. That is the point I want to convey. So they do allow, they do not allow the external world to dictate their inner state. What I mean by external world is anything that you possess with you or that is being associated with this mind-body sense complex. So the simple thing, the notion of I that we retain is something which is common whether you are at the age of 4 or 24 or 64 or 84. The I is something which runs through, but I am able to see as I am the subject I am able to witness the object of all the physical changes as well as the intellect that changes. So there is an observer and observed. So the idea here is, so you are the observer and the mind-body sense complex is observed. So there is something which is beyond this, is the viewpoint that is being presented by this philosophy. So the analogy of this guest house and the person staying in the guest house is nice, and it brings you the idea of detachment and non-attachment. By realizing this transitory nature and experiences, the futility of excessive striving, see, so that we can just live and we can maintain a certain sense of peace and serenity. In short, the exploration of birth, death and rebirth as perceived by certain philosophers seem to have a certain advantage in developing this personal growth as well as the societal well-being. This is the last slide. After all, the notion that is being presented is, so there is a conscious being which is associated with the self. Let us assume that this conscious being is something which is common across. It is like the energy getting associated with various devices. Let us assume that this simile. So I have a fan, I have a light, I have a flashlight, I have a computer. All of them are driven by a certain energy which is common. Similarly, there are various bodies, whether it is human body, this race, that race, monkey, donkey, mosquito, whatever it is, assume that there is a certain conscious which gets connected. Okay? Now, if you have this kind of a notion that this is a temporal connection with a certain physical mass, okay? If you have this notion, then you can always say that this notion of this conscious being, which you may call as Atman, is something which is common across all beings, not necessarily human beings, even mosquito, donkey, tree, grass, whatever it is. Assume that they also have a certain consciousness. Now, once you have this, that is what I am, if you just feel, then what happens is, nobody who has a faculty of thinking wants to harm himself. And thereby, you would never ever want to hurt the other being as well. So I am associated with this physical mass for some time. So too you are associated. The flashlight cannot say that 0-watt lamp that you are useless, right? So both are driven, and I have a certain feature I can only emit, though the power is same, I can only emit certain things, as simple as that. Okay? So that the same self is something which is running around everywhere. If you maintain this kind of a philosophy which is beyond this mind-body sense complex, then that is likely to make you see unconsciously that you cannot be unjust and unkind to other fellow as you cannot be for yourself. Okay? That's it. So in conclusion, the principles presented in some of the Indian scriptures, particularly Vedanta, have a certain potential to attenuate, because there is another thing that you see. It is not necessarily the interaction between the human beings that I am talking about. The interaction between the nature and the human beings, this is another aspect that also is important. The nature is generally considered as brute and stupid, which is not necessarily the case. Okay? So today, there is a lot of study which is going on in the name of deep ecology and this Gaia hypothesis, etc., etc. So you can't, finally, if you think deeply, differentiate between the conscious and the unconscious being also. Everything is a manifestation of one and the same thing, whether you go so deeply into physics or you go so deeply into philosophy. Okay? So this is something which is very interesting to note. The mad rush that we have is all thinking that we are here to enjoy what is presented by nature. So in that context, so what happens is many a times, more often than not, we don't pay due care and respect to nature. Perhaps holding this kind of a belief system is likely to help us overcome the various kinds of trouble that we are facing in trying to deal with other human beings or in trying to deal with the nature. Thank you very much.